Clearly, photojournalism is your calling. I wanted to go a little bit back and find out when did you feel that photojournalism is it?
Sure. I think I started photographing when I was like 12, so I was quite young. But I had no idea, I was never really introduced to photojournalism as a profession until I was about 21, so after I graduated from university. So for me, photography was always just sort of making pretty pictures and trying to find the light and trying to compose an image. But when I moved to Argentina when I was 21 years old, after I graduated, I went to school in Wisconsin for international relations. I wanted to learn Spanish, so I moved to Argentina, and it was there that I became aware of pictures in the newspaper and the power of images to tell a story. And that was sort of this great epiphany for me.
For the journalist, you also have a knack of selecting very dangerous places to go to. Afghanistan, Pakistan.
What happened was I was interested in certain social issues and some political issues, and they happened to always be in war zones. And so, for example, in 2000, I was living in India, and I was covering a lot of women's stories, and I had a roommate at the time who was working in Afghanistan under the Taliban. And he came back from a trip and he said, you know, you care about women's issues, why don't you go to Afghanistan and photograph women living under the Taliban? And for me, it seemed like the most natural thing to do. Sure, why not? Of course, it didn't dawn on me at that time that photography was illegal, that women couldn't walk around unescorted, that, you know, there was no American embassy if something went wrong. But I was so anxious to tell these stories, and it seemed very important to me to not be debilitated by fear or any, the notion that something might go wrong. So I would just go.
You went through a lot. I'm sure you discussed it in your book, but there was a car crash, you suffered yourself, you saw your friends, your colleagues suffering, dying. What does it take to go back?
I think September 11th was really sort of the launching point for my generation of photographers covering war, because many of us started covering war because after September 11th, naturally, the United States went to war, and so a lot of us went. For many years, we sort of survived, and we escaped death, and we escaped things happening to our community. It's a very tight-knit group of photographers and journalists who cover war consistently. But with the Arab Spring, a lot of that changed. And so, yes, I was in a car accident in Pakistan and my driver died. So that was very, very traumatic. But after that was really when our community and when I started suffering a lot of these hits. Like, many of our friends were killed, abducted in the Arab Spring. I myself was taken hostage in Libya and held for a week, and it was quite brutal. I mean, I was beaten and tied up and put in prison. And these are things that, when I got out, I had to ask myself, will I go back? And for me, the answer was always yes. I had to understand that what I was doing was putting my family through a difficult time every time I went away, but I also believe fundamentally in this work. I believe that people need to see what's happening in these war zones, and I believe that I have the tools to tell those stories, and it's a set of tools that you acquire over years. It's not like anyone can just get up and go to a war zone. So, after I had been covering war for a decade, I couldn't just shut the door.
So, obviously we're at Cannes. Very different scene from what you got used to in your professional line of job. So, why you're here?
One of the philosophies I have as a photojournalist is to try to get the work out to as broad of an audience as I can, in as many different mediums. So I recently just wrote a memoir. It's called It's What I Do, and a lot of that book is trying to explain to people why I do this job and why anyone who dedicates his or her life to covering war does it. It's not the adrenaline rush. So it's really, me being in Cannes has to do with expanding the audience, having people understand what it is about photography and photojournalism, why it's so important, why it's important to tell these stories, and why it's important for our worlds to intersect. The world of advertising reaches a great audience. Can we get these issues, humanitarian issues, human rights issues, into the advertising world? In a subtle way. It doesn't have to be this graphic, crazy way. So that's why I'm here.